Well, hello everyone on SYM. I'm happy for you guys to be watching, and once again, I am sorry for not getting this video on time. It appears that I'm still relatively new to recording and doing things on YouTube, and as I was going through Revelation just yesterday, uh, it was just packed with so much in chapter 6, and I ended up writing about 5 pages of the content because there's just so much that I wanted to cover with it. And so that's why this video is coming a little bit late, because there's just so much going on with it. And as you can see, I'm still in Sherwood Park here recording this, and so next week I plan to be back in Lloyd for some of the things that we said that we were going to be covering over, like Adventureverse on Mondays and different hangouts with families and things like that. So hopefully that is going to be happening next week. As far as other updates, there is not much to really talk about. The Blessed Forward ministry is going to be kicking off right away here soon, so if you want any more details on that, you can find it on the website on southridge.co with Blessed Forward tab on our main page. And with that kind of all the way, we're going to transition to the prayer video. Well, hello SYM. This is an interesting video that I have for our Prayer of Lloyd Minster with our Revelation series. Probably you're wondering why this cam is all shaky, and that is because I left all my stuff in Sherwood Park, because this is actually Sunday that I'm filming this, but because I had to do stuff for our Sunday worship service, I had to come back. Jill's in Sherwood Park right now currently with all the things that I have there for the youth videos I've been setting up there. So I am here doing a video without any of that stuff, without my tripod and all that, but figured I'd continue to do this because yeah, it's just an important thing that I believe that we should be doing in our community. So if you guys don't recognize this area, this is kind of in between Rendell Park and Bishop Lloyd Middle School, two schools that I went to and that I grew up in. And the park that I'm in is actually the park that we did the Terry Fox walk and things like that, and there's baseball diamonds, soccer fields. Don't know the name of it, but the reason why I chose this area is because actually at the intersection just over here there have been I think a few fatalities, and just recently there was a shooting not too long ago in the apartments back over there. And so this is definitely an area that I believe that could be using prayer and just lifting up. So Heavenly Father, I thank you for our city, our town, all that you have for us. And I just pray a blessing over this area and the people that live here, and for any activity that is going on here that is not of you, we silence it in your name, Jesus, and we just ask for an abundance of your love and for hurts to be healed, as well as any turmoil that is there. We just love you, Lord, and we want you to bless this area, and we pray this all in your name. Amen. With these prayer videos, I find that it's actually challenging me to be a little bit more intentional with my prayers, because that's something that I found with the last couple months, that my prayers and just my daily routine has kind of become a little bit mundane, or like kind of like same thing happens this day, same thing happens this day, because of some of the restrictions that we were under. But with this prayer, it makes things a little bit different for me, because I'm intentionally going out to areas that I know in the city that I've grown up in to pray over that area for specific things that I know that's gone on. So with this last one, by the two schools that I grew up going to, I know about shootings, I know about people that have been hit by cars there, and just some of the atmosphere atmospheric things that have gone on, and the goal is just to be able to lift up the city as much as possible. And so I'm strongly encouraging people to be able to do the same and to be able to lift up the city as well. And I would challenge everyone to find a different location once a week and lift it up, and just pray for the city of Lloydminster, pray for our provinces, pray for our country and the world. With all the things that are going on, the more prayer, the better, so that we can rely fully on God through these times. We're going to be going through quite a bit in this series of Revelation. Something that I wanted to mention a while back is there's going to be something put onto the youth page on our website for questions that people can ask for this series. And I know that this is going to be a series that there's going to be a lot of questions that even I myself are asking with this. And so I wanted to give the opportunity for anyone that wanted something specific asked for Revelation that I can research on and maybe add into the lesson here. So if you go to southridge.co, there's going to be a form on our website if you go under the youth page, and there you could submit a question. They'll go right to my email, and then I'll research it and then probably post it into the video for further videos there. And yeah, hopefully you guys have some good questions, because there's a lot to go over with this content. And at the very same, we're going to be doing a new series for our Sunday morning worship services. And the series is going to be called I've Got Questions. And just based on the title, it's based on people's questions that they're giving us as staff. And with our staff being a little bit low now, with just myself and Dieter, I'm actually going to be taking over some preaching on Sundays. So I would encourage people to go to our website again. There's going to be more forms on there for you guys to submit questions. And these questions are going to be based with the sermons that we provide. And we just want to give content, give messages that people are generally wanting to hear, or questions that they've been maybe wrestling with their own prayer walk or their walk with Christ. So hopefully that helps out people to do that. And yeah, I think that's it for all my updates on the news. So let's get into it. We've been starting with Revelation with a few themes, with John essentially starting off with receiving this revelation as he's a prisoner on Patmos from the Roman government, because they couldn't kill him because God had a purpose for him. So they banished him to this prison colony island, and this is where he receives the revelation. And a couple chapters that John is talking about here is in regards to these 7 churches that are receiving warning, instructions, and also encouragement of things that they're doing right. And then if we go further from there, in chapter 4, we finally get into the point where John is lifted up in spirit form, or lifted up in spirit, it says in the text, and he is in this throne room with 24 elders and with these 4 beasts that have like a human head, an eagle head, an ox head, and I forgot the next one. Somewhere down here, I'll put it down here. And then there's the one on the throne that has a scroll, and there's no one in this whole company of angels and elders that is worthy to take the scroll. And then with subtle kind of dramatic effect, the Lamb comes forward and he brings about taking the scroll. And now we're starting in chapter 6, where he starts to break the seals of the scrolls. And this is all still in the vision that John's having, because it's back in 4 that he's lifted up in spirit, and we haven't really been released from that yet. And so all this is kind of like what he's seen, trying to interpret from there. So you'll see lots of things like and after this I saw this, or there's something like this, going into the different analogies or disclaimers on what he's seen. Because any of us, if we were to have a dream or something like that, we would try our best to try to describe it in whatever words or vocabulary that we have. But sometimes we might be missing the mark because there's some things that are just so weird and specifically detailed. And so we're going to be looking at chapter 6 here. And originally, this text was going to be chapter 6, 7, and 8. But then I just got writing and I got working on chapter 6. And this is the chapter that the riders get introduced. And the riders only have about 8 verses for these 4 horsemen riders in it. But I just kept on looking at content and looking at the times that we're in. So chapter 6 ended up being its whole series on just this one specific video. So hopefully there's a lot to unpack here for you guys, and hopefully there's a lot for us to discuss here. So I'm going to be reading from the ESV version here, using my iPad today because my Bible's super heavy to carry and I don't really want to hold it while I'm reading. So I'm going to be starting here at verse 1, starting in chapter 6. So I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals, and hold on, I'm in the NIV. Nothing wrong with the NIV, but I started with ESV and I want to continue that. It's not really much difference anyway. So verse 1 again. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." Another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard a 3rd living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand, and then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil or wine. When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard a voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was the pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over the 4th of the earth to kill by sword and famine and plague, and by wild beasts of the earth. And that's where I'm going to take a break here, because that's the encompassing of those 8 verses just cover those riders. And what's interesting about the riders, and something that I learned in Bible college, was that I thought the riders had huge significance with the concept of scripture and end times and everything, but they're not really covered that much in the text. At least not at this point in the text. There might be mention of them further. I just haven't been able to research or go farther into Revelation to see if they are. But the very interesting thing about them is just the small impact that they have, yet big impact at the very same time. And so I think our culture's kind of elevated them because they're fascinating. If you were to think of like literary or fantasy fiction writer to use this as plot points, it's actually kind of fun. I mean, you could look at this picture here of the Horsemen and the X-Men movies from comic books, or this picture depicted from just the Google search I did, or this one, or this one, or this one. There's so many depictions of the 4 horsemen because there's a lot of intensity in these 8 verses that talk about them. The first one that we have is the White Rider, and the items that he's given is a crown, a sword, and a bow. And he's coming to conquer and to have conquest over the land. So his whole deal is to bring about battling and bring about war and strife. The interesting thing with these riders for each of them is that they are summoned by the 4 beasts. Those beasts that had the human head, the eagle head, the ox head, and again I'm missing another one down here. But they are the ones that are calling forth the saying, "Come," in a loud echoing voice of heaven, and then they come forth after the seal is broken by the Lamb. And so there's different forms of power being displayed here, because it's not the elders are saying it, and it's not even the one that's sitting on the throne that's saying it, or the Lamb. It's these beasts that are saying it. And so it's, I don't know if there's much here to look at of why the beasts are summoning them, but anyways, it doesn't even say which specific beast summons which specific horseman, at least not in my version of the Bible here. And so the white horse is coming, and his whole deal is to bring about war, like I said there. And I started to think about timing of this, because the thing about Revelation, like we talked about, is that John is up here in spirit form seeing visions and things like that. So time is a very hard thing to discern with it. And then if you have different views on Revelation, it can depict on how you see these events. Like if you have, for example, an all millennialist view, this is a view that we're in the 1,000-year reign right now, that it started somewhere between 1,000 to whenever it started. I'm not really familiar with that, but you would view this as the timeline that Christ is on the throne and his rule is happening. And so that kind of changes things of how you see how these four horsemen are coming into context, because there's a lot of violence and a lot of things that are happening with them. And so to have that view that Christ is on the throne now, like, are things going to get worse then? Well, they'd have to, because then you have this post-tribulation mindset that, like, all this tribulation, all this bad stuff is going to happen after here. And so that's why there's all these different viewpoints on Revelation. And this is why I'm going to challenge with, like, another kind of viewpoint that probably already exists, but I didn't do enough research to see where it fit with it. And so what's interesting about the white rider is, or all the riders, and specifically, is the color that they represent. Except for the black one, I couldn't really pinpoint why black was important on that. But the white rider, I went on a whole tangent on this, and I think it has something to do with, like, the world right now and kind of the race things that the world is dealing with right now. And so if you were to think about the white rider as being white, well, what are some of the biggest conquests, some of the biggest wars that the world has faced, and the countries and the nations that are represented there? So you got, if we go back to, like, Rome and Greece times, so Greece under Alexander essentially conquested most of the Middle East and established democracy, or established Greek rule over these nations. And then Rome kind of took over, and Rome had huge portions of land here. And then Rome turned into the Holy Roman Empire, and that's where you started to get popes and stuff. And then the conquests of the Crusades started to happen, and there were people dressed in white went down to reclaim the Holy Land. Brutal wars, killing people along the way. It was awful. They came to conquer and conquest. And then you have the British Empire, also the Napoleonic Empire with France. France dealing with all of its stuff through history, and the colonization of different nations here and there, the establishing of the Americas, then the Civil War of the America getting out of British rule, Canada going at war with the US in the War of 1812, and then you got two massive world wars, and all these massive things in history. And I know there's other nations that aren't white that go to battle and did these things, but the biggest ones that we have in history are predominantly white nations going against white nations in this whole establishing of land. And so this is why you could have different views on this. You can have this that the white rider maybe has been released already, because there's not really a set point of time that these seals are broken, because it doesn't say, and then it says the next, and then the next one. And once you get to the fifth and sixth seal, these ones seem like these are the opportune ones that, like, okay, this is right before the beginning of the end sort of thing. But could these riders already been released already? Because we've already had huge portions of wars happen, and loss of life and conquering of land. So I just thought it was pretty interesting of the color and like how that can make a connection. Whether or not that rider is released already, we already have strife in the world, and that, so something to really consider when we're thinking about this horse. And so next we're going to the fiery red horse, and this is kind of in close connection with the white horse. So the fiery red horse, the items that he was given was a great sword, and I think that's about it. Yeah, just a great sword. And that's all that he's given, but he was told to take peace away from the world, and the fiery red is supposed to signify blood and this unrest. And this is where I think the order of things is kind of interesting, because, well, if you think about the white horse, like the white horse came to conquer and was given a sword. Oh, thing that I didn't mention is the bow that was given to the white horseman. So sorry, red horse, I gotta push you aside because I have like half a page written about the white horse. So the bow is significant because people assume that the white horse could also have different people represented by it. Some people think that it represents the white rider that comes in Revelation 19 or 20. And that's Christ coming back, the one that pulls a sword out of his mouth. I think that's mentioned in Revelation 1 as well. And he like comes to conquest the same way over the nations. But I think it's a little bit different because we already have the lamb represented there, and he can't really be his own seal. So some also think that the white rider could also be the antichrist, because he's going to bring about nations and bring about destruction that way. But that also doesn't really fit well, because the antichrist is ultimately someone that gets cast into the lake of fire. But then so is death in Hades, and that's the last rider too. So very interesting to see. Are these angels? Are these just beings that are representing a seal, or are they just representation of the strife that's going to happen on Earth, and maybe they aren't really real things, but just driving forces that humanity goes into? It's visions, so we don't need to spend too much time on. So sorry, red horse. We're gonna start explaining about you now. So the fiery red horse, blood, take away in peace from the world, and this is really that representation that the fall of humanity is coming even more closer, because despite the violence of the white rider, this fiery red one is coming without conquest of land, without establishing dominance. This is just killing savagely. And this is also representation of humanity's downfall, because we've already had genocides throughout different nations. You don't have to go far into a Google search to research top 10 genocides, and you'll see millions of people that have been killed off just because the race that was killing them thought they were superior, or because they're just violent. And so this is another representation that this rider could be auto-released, because the violence and unjust that we have in our society and our world is elevated. And this also makes for an interesting blend of Satan being released already at this point, because it already mentions in, I think, First Peter, in one of the 5 chapters of First Peter, again below, of Satan being the ruler of this realm for now. Like, he was given authority over the earth, and then eventually loses that authority once Christ comes to reclaim what is actually his, because God created everything. And so Satan's rule is kind of like a false rule, but he was given that authority. I don't really understand why, but it makes it kind of interesting. If these horsemen are real horsemen, they're going to be doing crazy, like, violent things, and like Satan's not kind of mentioned into this passage at all. So if they are real, they're kind of worse than, well, that's kind of dangerous to say, but the connection that I'm trying to make here is that the interesting part of why these horsemen are doing this is to bring about the judgment, and I think that's really important with the fifth seal that we'll see. So peace is taken away. Really not hard to see in the world. Even right now, there's peace taken away all the time because we're violent people, especially when an enemy is trying to get us more divisive. Next, we're on to the black rider, and he is given probably the most lamest weapons. He's given scales, and when I was first reading this, I was thinking like scales, like dragon scales, fish scales, kind of like the scales that went over Paul's eyes back in Acts. But the scales he was given are kind of like those ancient measurement ones, so where like you put it down and then you have your gold weighing here and then your other substance, and then if they are balanced, then it's a fair trade. If they're not, like, I'm not an expert on the economics here, and so essentially what's happening in this chapter is the influx of grain, the influx of food and all that stuff. And I thought this was really interesting because you don't have to go long in history to see the rise in inflation of groceries and things. I used to work at a grocery store for 4 years in between college years, and I still remember the prices of some of the things there, and some of those items have jumped up regular price to $1, sometimes $2, and you don't have to even go far back in history to see when things were much cheaper by just like when my parents grew up and things like that. Like, I don't know if you ever heard your grandparents talk about when I was a kid things cost like 5 cents or something like that. Actually, this is why I need my Bible for this, so because this explains it a lot better than I can. So no, I'm not in Matthew. So this is in my study notes of my Bible, and just see if anything sticks out. The rider on the black horse carries scales for measuring grains and their prices. A heavily voiced comments on the scale's significance, citing inflated grain prices 8 to 10 times normal. Siege and disruption of commercial routes will produce scarcity, driving prices up. See Deuteronomy 28:49-57, 2 Kings 6:24-25, and so on. Local crops such as oil and wine are unaffected. However, showing that the scarcity is limited, not comprehensive, some think that the command not to harm the oil and wine may have social significance. The command not to harm oil and wine may have social significance, since the rich were primary consumers of oil and wine. It could also be a prediction of events like that of AD 92, when Emperor Domitian, during a grain shortage, ordered the vineyards cut down and to make room for more wheat fields. This caused such backlash that he reincited the order. In other words, extreme measures would have to be taken due to the progress pouring out of judgment. So, I think out of all of them, it's maybe in my view this horse isn't as bad, but it sets up for more division because, like it said, like, well, don't touch these because like the rich and elite have these. And if you think about even in our times right now, like some of the people that are kind of scared for the future aren't really the rich. Well, I can't really speak on them, but I've talked to people that have lost their jobs because the oil field is pretty scarce right now, and job market in different parts is a little bit scarce. But you could go on YouTube and you can see these celebrities are saying hang in there with their videos when they're taking it from mansions that none of us would able to be afford unless something drastic changed in our life. And so there's that separation between realities. I think that's getting to where the poor kind of get hit more because the driving things are up, and the rich are unaffected because they're already looked after. And that can just even go even more with the red horse, with that divisiveness, and the peace is unjust, and the peace is separated, and people are getting more angry. And so now we're looking at the pale horse. And the pale horse is probably the one that's most represented in fiction or in literary devices, because this is the horse that represents death, and Hades follows him. And something that I mentioned about the first white rider and who this rider could be, well, this one specifically says death, and then death at the end of Revelation is cast out and put into the lake of fire too. So not that angels can go bad, because Satan was an angel and he was cast down, but it just kind of sets up this thing that he's an instrument of God that eventually will get cast out. So it's very interesting on the personalities of these. If Death and Hades are just entities of like the thought of death, because once the new heavens and new earth are made, like there's no death that's supposed to happen, so the whole idea of death was cast out. But in this we have huge ramifications of, is ramifications the right word? We have huge dealings that are happening with the pale horse, and I have some numbers here, because what the pale horse does is that he takes 1/4 of the population with different means. And so I have some stats here that make it kind of interesting. So depending where you search, World War II had killed about 50 million to 80 million on a global population of 2.3 million, roughly 3 to 5% of the world. So not 1/4 of the world. Yeah, it would need to be 25% to do that. You get to famines, the worst one, the Bengal famine of 1770, estimated to take around 10 million lives, 1/3 of Bengal's population at the time. Other notable famines, like the Great Famine of 1876 to 78, took 6 million to 10 million lives, and the Indian famine that took 1.25 to 10 million people dead. And still, with a global population of about 500 million to 1 billion, still reaches small percentages. Death by diseases have always been increased. We have HIV that has taken 36 million lives and is still climbing. We have flus that are just constant, that take lives all the time. COVID would fit under something like that, of a disease that's still taking lives. But we're not seeing anything that has taken significant, well, and that's a hard thing to say, because we're dealing with 1/4 that the Bible's saying here, and even though all these are bad and horrible, they don't do 1/4 of the whole global population. And then as far as beasts, I don't know, shark attacks and bear attacks and all those things, like those numbers don't even get close. So maybe it's adding all these things up, and it's an accumulation of all the things that have happened over time. Because the thing about population is that the human population is constantly growing. Like I think we're at 7.8 billion people on the planet right now. And so even something that takes out millions of people, though bad, the global population doesn't get affected as bad to that number, because almost 8 billion is a lot there. And the whole point of all this is that it comes back to the white rider and like all those other riders, like if this is happening continually or not, because we haven't faced something that has taken 25% of our population. So just taking in the numbers right now, with 8 billion, for that to be 25% of the population, that would have to be, I think, 2 billion people, if that adds up. Like, so 2 billion people would need to die by these means. And whether this is a combination of all this stuff is interesting because, well, a lot of people that study end times or eschatology, as it's said, is they have these multiple views where it's happening now, hasn't happened yet. And the glaring thing with that is like, well, how prepared can we be? There's people that maybe the rapture happens before all this, where you get that First Thessalonians 5, where all the people are caught up in the clouds, the dead are raised, and all that. But yeah, it's hard to pinpoint on all this. I think with my personal views that we're seeing glimpses of what's to come. Like we're seeing the foreshadow of worse things to come because right now, like even where I live in Canada, like it's relatively peaceful. Like we're not perfect, but there's like I haven't felt really unsafe to go out, but there's multiple places in the world that are, and so until that kind of adds up, like it doesn't communicate the same kind of end times yet. And so that's just kind of my view because there's higher populations in the world that are experiencing this, and maybe that's where those numbers are coming from. So these are things to consider for these four horsemen as we continue to read on for the rest of chapter 6 here. And my iPad's gonna die, so hopefully I don't need it too much longer. So we're gonna be picking it up at verse 9 here. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of all those who had been slain because of the word of the God and testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer, until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed, just as they'd been. In my Bible version, it says like to rest a little longer, like they're woken up with the fifth seal and rest, which I think is very significant. 12. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made on goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from fig trees when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the princes and generals, and the rich and mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks and mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us, hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?" So, why is the fifth soul oh, fifth seal the souls of the believers? It kind of takes a big change from seeing these four horsemen being released, and like, are they even doing what they're supposed to be doing yet at this point? And so this whole timing thing like really messes a little bit, but I think the significance of talking about the fifth seal being the believers is that it's adding up there. Like the people that are martyred for faith is accumulating there because their whole stance, or our whole stance, if you die for your faith, is you become a martyr, and it's something that God takes into great account because you died on his behalf for your faith. And that's really important to consider because he takes justice for that. And so this whole thing of like humans asking, and this is the classic thing that humans ask with it, is like, how long? Like, how long are we supposed to wait here? Like, I don't know if you've waited in a line, but that's something that we ask all the time. And so there, he gives them a white robe, and he says to wait a little bit longer. And then my Bible version, it says to rest. And so this gives a picture that when people die, like, are they immediately in heaven, or are they given a soul sleep? Because there's things to support both that, but they're told to rest, and rest means a whole bunch of things. Like when you're laying on a couch after doing some hard work but not necessarily sleeping, you're taking a rest. When God was finished creation at the end of day 7, he took a rest. Was he sleeping, or was he taking a break? He was stopping from the physical labor that he was doing. Like, yeah, so when it says a rest, like, it could mean either or, but the significance is to wait. And I'm going to go for the part where rest, where like they're actually asleep, because it fits with this thought that I'm having. And this is not a significant thought that like it changes the whole thing. It's just something that for us to be challenged when I finish talking about the rest of this stuff. So keep that really important. And then there's definitely a time difference between the 5th and 6th, because the added number of people killed for faith is going, and this is where people kind of have that separation of post-tribulation and pre-tribulation, where like Christians aren't going to be going through that, or Christians are going to be going through that. And when they either or that they do, there's a recognized number that like God goes, enough is enough, and comes down and brings this judgment of the 6th seal. Because the 6th seal is essentially this bent cataclysmic event of the earth, of a big quake, and something really significant for the people in this area of modern, well, ancient modern day Turkey. I don't know the right wording of that, but earthquakes happen all the time there, on volcanic eruptions. People know what it feels like for the earth to shake. And so this whole thing of like John eventually giving this to the 7 churches that are in that modern time, or in that time, sorry, is that they know what that would feel like for the earth to shake. And then to make worse, that the moon turns blood, the sun is becoming desolate, the whole star host, the whole cosmic entities are falling, and a whole matter of creation that God had created is being renewed through destruction. And the thing that every ruler and king gets at this point is that, oh no, this is God. Because they know what earthquakes are, but with the additive everything that's going on, they recognize it, and they hide in caves, much like Adam and Eve tried to hide their shame in the garden when they had sinned. And that's the big thing, that's the only thing that they know how to do at this point, is because they spent maybe their whole lives going against God, killing believers, or going against what God had commanded. And then when you finally are face to face with like the reality of like the person that, or the entity that you're going up with, and like saying that they don't exist, they show up, what would you do? Like, you would hide. And they would rather the rocks kill them than face the wrath of the one on the throne. And so that's very interesting to me. Of the 6th seal is essentially the establishing of like the earth. There's no shadow of a doubt that the earth now recognize who God is. And this is stuff that Jesus said back in Matthew 24, 29, that section there, where he's saying like he comes, and like essentially in those chapters of Matthew, like the whole world knows who God is at that point, because he's revealing it. And it's a very dangerous time. That's why we encourage people to believe in God now, and to put your faith in Jesus now, and to have that genuine relationship, because to have this kind of thrust upon you, like, and I'm hoping that there's a rapture before all this, because I don't even want to imagine. But I'm going to be closing off here right away, and I'm coming back to that 5th seal of why God says like to sleep or to take rest, to not take notice of all these things here. And I think the important thing for us believers is to take note of that, because why, like, he breaks the seal, and like they awake, and they're asking how long. Well, in that how long, like, they're waiting for the justification that they were promised that God would bring. And in that, we can feel susceptible to the temptation of earning that justification. And that could be a very dangerous thing, even for us as believers who maybe not have felt much persecution, but we see the wrath of the world, and we see the things that go on, and sometimes we feel that aching for justification to happen, but that's not what we're supposed to be feeling. We're supposed to be feeling that love and generosity for people, even if they slap us in the face and ridicule us. And so I think why, and this is just my theory on this, but you can consider it for your own walk, why the martyred saints are put to rest or put to sleep even though they are awake, is because if they were to see the judgment on all people, the ones that killed them, and take into account that this is John probably seen some of his friends at this point, because 90 AD led to 60 AD. 60 AD killed a lot of prominent church leaders like Paul, Peter, all the disciples. He's probably seen all those people in this, and in that they're put to sleep because God maybe doesn't want to put the temptation of them feeling wholly justified seeing their enemies vanquished. And I know for me, if I see someone, kind of like a karma thing, even though I don't believe in karma, but I see something bad happen to someone that I think deserves it, it kind of brings up like a good feeling that shouldn't be good, and it feels like, yeah, that person got justice, and I don't see the mercy and the grace first. And so I think that's really important for us to consider for that. And the thing that I think we could take away from all of this, because the rest kind of comes to speculation and things, and it's kind of cool to think about with the different viewpoints, but for us as believers, we know that these end times are going to be happening because it's all throughout Scripture. And for us to be adamant for people to know about God before these times come, and to have mercy on them, and to try our best to communicate that of that love, is our main and only goal, really, because when God comes back, like I keep saying, it's going to be too late. These people, these rulers at the end, are wishing that mountains would fall on them rather than to face God. And so the challenge that I have for you guys is to think about the people that don't know God yet. Pray for them. Have conversations with them. Keep on encouraging them. I know I have a few people in my life that I'm still trying to figure out how to have conversations with, but the important thing is to continue that as much as possible, even though the struggle is there and the awkwardness is there. Because the main thing that I get out of Revelation is once things start to happen, it becomes too late. And we don't want to have that for anyone. So extend love, show generosity, be Christ-like, and have those attributes going forward. Thank you for watching. We're going to be covering more Revelation hopefully next week with 7, 8, and 9. But again, like, I could be just going by chapter because this one had a whole lot of content. So again, if you have any questions about Revelation, feel free to go on our website at southridge.co, submit some questions of things to be covered. If I've missed anything, or if there's something that you want to talk about, feel free to put it into the comments there. And until next time, see ya.